The paper was already on the table when I realized I was no longer being asked, I was being directed. My son didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply placed the pen closer to my hand, like you would move a glass of water for someone who is too weak to reach it. I remember thinking, so this is what power sounds like when it is silent. I was 87 that winter. The radiator in my apartment in Lviv had been knocking for so many years that I stopped noticing it until that day, when every sound in the room suddenly felt too loud. Even the scratch of the pen on paper felt like it belonged to someone else's life, not mine. And I signed. Not because I understood it fully, not because I agreed, but because my son was standing too close, and I had spent my entire life teaching myself that sons do not stand that close unless they need something important. I will tell you what it costs a man to realize, at 87, that obedience can look like love, and love can be used like a tool when no one is watching. I know this better than most because I once built my entire life around trusting the wrong hands. I worked 46 years in a municipal office, handling documents that people believed meant safety. I used to joke that ink was more permanent than memory. I stopped joking after that winter, and there was one envelope still in my drawer today that I should have burned the moment I saw it. It didn't start with the signature. That would be too clean, too simple. It started 3 months earlier in October, when my son began calling me father instead of my name. At first, I didn't notice. Then I did. He came every Sunday at exactly 10:40, always with the same smell of cold air and cheap coffee on his coat. He would sit in my kitchen without removing his jacket, as if he was only stopping briefly on his way to somewhere more important. On the table, there were always papers, always numbers, always words I didn't fully read. One Sunday, I remember the clock stopped at 11:03. Not literally, but in my mind, that was the moment something changed shape. He said, "It's just a formality, Father. You sign it, and everything stays in the family." Everything stays in the family. He repeated that phrase 3 times over the weeks. Each time, it became less of an explanation and more of a pressure. The second moment came in November, when I tried to take the paper to the window. I wanted better light. That was my excuse. My hands were shaking slightly, not enough for anyone to comment, but enough for me to notice. My son stepped closer, gently took the document from me, and placed it back on the table. "Worry about the details," he said. "I've already checked everything." That sentence stayed with me longer than the ink. Already checked everything. As if my role was no longer to understand, only to comply. By December, I stopped asking questions out loud. The apartment felt smaller, though nothing had changed in it. The same cupboard, the same cracked tiles near the sink, the same photograph of his childhood on the wall, him holding a wooden toy car, missing one wheel. I used to think that picture proved I had been a good father once. Now it only proved time had passed without permission. On the last Sunday before the signature, he brought a new pen. He placed it on the table like an offering. And I understood, without anyone saying it, that this pen had already chosen the outcome. Scene 1912, winter morning. It was still dark outside when he arrived, earlier than usual. 9:12. I remember the exact time because I had just boiled water for tea and hadn't yet poured it into the cup. He didn't greet me properly. He placed the document directly on top of my breakfast napkin, as if the table had already been cleared for business, not for eating. "Let's finish this today," he said. Not a question, a timeline. I looked at the paper and noticed something new, a line already highlighted in yellow. My name sat inside that line like it had been placed there by someone who no longer needed my permission. Scene 2, 14:37, same day. He stayed for lunch, though he didn't eat. 14:37. The soup went cold between us. I asked him quietly, "What happens after I sign?" He smiled without warmth. "Nothing changes for you." That sentence should have calmed me. Instead, it felt like something carefully chosen to end conversation, not to explain truth. He slid the pen closer again. This time, it touched my wrist slightly. Not hard, just enough to remind me where I was sitting in the hierarchy of that room. Scene 3, 1858, evening light. The light in my kitchen at 1858 in December is always thin, like it is trying not to disturb anything. He stood by the window while I sat at the table. For a moment, I saw him not as my son, but as a man negotiating something he believed was already decided. "You taught me to be responsible," he said without turning around. I almost laughed. because I did teach him responsibility. I just didn't realize I had also taught him how to take it from someone else. He turned back then and added, "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." And I understood something simple and terrible. This was already decided. Only my signature was missing. It happened at 1926. I remember because the streetlight outside flickered exactly twice before staying on, and my son looked at it without blinking, as if even the light outside was part of his schedule. The document was in front of me again. Same paper, same pen. But something in the room had changed, not the objects, but the air between them. It felt tighter, like there was less space left for hesitation. He didn't sit this time. He stood behind my chair. That detail matters more than anything. Because when a man stands behind you, you stop feeling like a person making a decision and start feeling like a decision already being executed. "Sign it, Father," he said quietly. No anger, no emotion, just finality. My hand moved closer to the paper without my permission. I don't know if it was fatigue or habit or something older than both. And then I noticed something small. The document had a second page I hadn't seen before. A clause at the bottom, dense, legal, cold. It said I would be transferring control not just temporarily but permanently. Everything, accounts, property, authority, even decisions about my own care. I looked up at him. For the first time, he avoided my eyes. "Did you read this?" I asked. A pause. Then he said, "It's standard." That word, standard, as if betrayal could ever be standard. My fingers tightened around the pen, and in that moment I saw not my son but the man he had become when I stopped asking questions too early in his life. There was a silence after that, a real one, not the kind filled with waiting but the kind where something breaks and no one dares name it. I placed the pen down, slowly, and said the sentence I never thought I would say to him. "Then you don't need me to sign it." He laughed once, short, disbelieving. "You already agreed." I looked at him for a long time, and I answered, "No." I just stopped resisting. The mistake was not the signature. The mistake was something older I was calling pressure by the wrong name for too long. In my head, I had a word for it now. Borrowed will. That is when a man starts thinking his decisions are still his, while someone else is already holding the pen. I told myself I was being patient. A father understanding his son. A quiet man avoiding conflict. But patience without boundaries is just delayed surrender. I learned something that night at 1926. Control doesn't always arrive as force. Sometimes it arrives as familiarity, as Sunday visits, as tea that goes cold, as phrases like "don't worry" and "it's standard." And once you stop questioning those phrases, you are already halfway gone. I looked at that paper again and saw it differently, not as a document, but as a mirror. It was showing me when I stopped speaking and started agreeing. You might think this only happens in big betrayals, in courts, in wars, in dramatic fights where someone shouts and leaves the room. But most of the time, it doesn't. Most of the time, it happens in kitchens where someone stands too close behind you. You tell yourself, "He is my son, he would never go that far." That is the sentence I trusted. Tell me, how many things in your life are you still calling love, just because you are afraid to rename them? I used to believe forgiveness meant staying soft no matter what. Now I know it also means knowing when silence is no longer kindness. There is a small scar on my left wrist from where the pen pressed too long that day. I still see it when I wash my hands. And sometimes I wonder, at what point does a man stop noticing he is being moved instead of moving himself? The pen is still in my drawer. Same place, same angle, same dull reflection when light from the kitchen hits it in the morning. Sometimes I take it out, not to write, but to remember what it felt like in my hand at 1926 when my fingers were no longer fully mine, and yet I still believed I had time to decide. The apartment is quieter now. My son doesn't come every Sunday anymore. He came once after that night, only once. He stood at the door longer than he used to, as if waiting for the version of me who would pretend nothing happened. We didn't talk about the paper. We talked about weather, about small things people use when the real thing is too heavy to touch. Before leaving, he looked at the floor and said, almost casually, "You didn't have to make it so difficult." I almost answered, but I didn't, because I finally understood something simple. Difficulty was not what I created. Clarity was, and that is what some people cannot forgive. Now, when I sit by the window at 87 and hear the radiator click in the morning, I don't think about betrayal first. I think about the exact moment silence became a decision. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. And if you are wondering whether I regret not signing faster, I don't. I only regret how long I confused obedience with love. The pen still waits in the drawer, but I don't.